So, this next chapter, I did record it originally, but it got corrupted on the recording. Thankfully, it was just the last chapter of the whole 50 minutes I read for was missing. Thank God, you know. Chapter 79. Why McCabe's soul grew coarse. Yes, I am recording, thank you. McCabe and Buchanan did not succeed in raising what was generally thought of as the standard of living, said Castle. Truth was that life was as short and brutish and mean as ever. But people didn't have to pay as much attention to the awful truth. As the living legend of the cruel tyrant in the city and the gentle holy man in the jungle grew, so too did the happiness of the people grow. They were all employed full-time as actors in a play they understood, that any human being anywhere could understand and applaud. So life became a work of art, I marveled. Yes. There was only one trouble with it. Oh? The drama was very tough on the souls of the two main actors, McCabe and Buchanan. As young men, they had been pretty much alike. Both had been half angel, half pirate. But the drama demanded that the pirate half of Buchanan and the angel half of McCabe wither away. And McCabe and Buchanan paid a terrible price in agony for the happiness of the people. McCabe knowing the agony of the tyrant, Buchanan knowing the agony of the saint. Excuse me. They both became, for all practical purposes, insane. Castle crooked the index finger of his left hand. And then people really did start dying on the hook. But Buchanan was never caught? I asked. McCabe never went that crazy. He never made a really serious effort to catch Buchanan. Would have been easy to do. Why didn't he catch him? McCabe was always sane enough to realize that without the holy man to war against, he himself would become meaningless. Papa Manzano understands that too. Do people still die on the hook? It's inevitably fatal. I mean, I said, does Papa really have people executed that way? He executes one every 2 years, just to keep the pot boiling, so to speak. He sighed, looking up at the evening sky. Busy, busy, busy. Sir? It's what we Buchananists say, he said, when we feel that a lot of mysterious things are going on. You? I was amazed. A Buchananist too? He gazed at me levelly. You too. You'll find out. End of chapter 79. Is this really Cat's Cradle? I told you like 3 times that it was going to be Cat's Cradle. I posted at least twice in Death and Morty that it was going to be Cat's Cradle. It's Cat's, like, I asked Carol if she was going to make it tonight, and she said that she had a doctor's appointment, so I was like, okay, I'll read Cat's Cradle. And then I posted that I was going to read Cat's Cradle, and now I'm reading Cat's Cradle. And in chat they're like, is Cat's Cradle? Why are you reading Cat's Cradle? I don't know, dude. It's cool. We're gonna make some progress on it. Like I said, I had a series of cursed events befall me. I had my broken tooth that stopped me from being able to record, and then I got sick and I was not able to use my voice, and then there was Thanksgiving. So I got really behind on some Cat's Cradle that I had promised on, and as time was going by, I was actively promising more because of my policy of doing it whenever every week that we did do more. So yeah, about 50 minutes of it just went up, and we're gonna do more tonight because I'm like, I owe people it. We're backdated on it. For those of you who are not listening for Cat's Cradle and who are listening for something else, I'm glad to have you here anyways. You've been tricked into being my captive. You're being tricked into being held hostage here by me. Against your will. being watched vigilantly by me, under my watchful eyes, with no escape. Okay. It's been 5 minutes and I've read one chapter. Sorry. Chapter 80. The Waterfall Strainers. Angela and Newt were on the cantilevered terrace with Julian, Castle, and me. We had cocktails. There was still no word from Frank. Both Angela and Newt, it appeared, were fairly heavy drinkers. Castle told me that his days as a playboy had cost him a kidney, and that he was unhappily compelled, perforce, to stick to ginger ale. Angela, when she got a few drinks into her, complained of how the world had swindled her father. He gave so much, and they gave him so little. I pressed her for examples of the world's stinginess and got some exact numbers. General Forge and Foundry gave him a $45 bonus for every patent his work led to, she said. That's the same patent bonus they paid anybody in the company. She shook her head mournfully. $45, and just think what some of those patents were for. Huh, I said. I assume he got a salary, too. The most he ever made was $28,000 a year. I'd say that's pretty good. She got very huffy. You know what movie stars make? A lot, sometimes. You know Dr. Breed made $10,000 more a year than Father did? That was an injustice. I'm sick of injustice. She was so surely exercised that I changed the subject. I asked Julian Castle what he thought had become of the painting he had thrown down the waterfall. There's a little village at the bottom, he told me. 5 or 10 shacks, I'd say. It's Papa Manzano's birthplace, incidentally. The waterfall ends in a big stone bowl there. The villagers have a net made out of chicken wire stretched across a notch in the bowl. Water spills out through the notch into a stream. And Newt's painting is in the net now, you think? I asked. This is a poor country, in case you haven't noticed, said Castle. Nothing stays in the net very long. I imagine Newt's painting is being dried in the sun by now, along with the butt of my cigar. 4 square feet of gummy canvas, the 4 milled and mitred sticks of the stretcher, some tacks, too, and a cigar. All in all, a pretty nice catch for some poor, poor man. I could just scream sometimes, said Angela, when I think about how much some people get paid and how little they paid Father. How much he gave. She was on the edge of a crying jag. Don't cry, Newt begged her gently. Sometimes I can't help it, she said. Go get your clarinet, urged Newt. That always helps. I thought at first that this was a fairly comical suggestion. But then, from Angela's reaction, I learned that the suggestion was serious and practical. When I get this way, she said to Castle and me, sometimes it's the only thing that helps. But she was too shy to get her clarinet right away. We had to keep begging her to play, and she had to have 2 more drinks. She's really just wonderful, little Newt promised. I'd love to hear you play, said Castle. All right, said Angela, finally, as she rose unsteadily. All right, I will. When she was out of earshot, Newt apologized for her. She's had a tough time. She needs a rest. She's been sick? I asked. Her husband is mean as hell to her, said Newt. He showed us that he hated Angela's handsome young husband, the extremely successful Harrison C. Connors, president of Fabritech. He hardly ever comes home, and when he does, he's drunk and generally covered with lipstick. From the way she talked, I said, I thought it was a very happy marriage. Little Newt held his hands 6 inches apart, and he spread his fingers. See the cat? See the cradle? End of chapter 80. Man, Castle sure is saying a lot. I tend to. Look at that, we've already killed a half hour. I think I'm going to try to make it to the I'm going to try and make it to the 45, 50, like 50-minute mark before I go on break. Yeah, we'll say at the 50-minute mark, like 10:50 or whatever the closest finished chapter is. That's when I'll go on break, I think. Excuse me. Let's hit it. Chapter 81. A White Bride for the Son of a Pullman Porter. I did not know what was going to come from Angela's clarinet. No one could have imagined what was going to come from there. I expected something pathological, but I did not expect the depth, the violence, the almost intolerable beauty of the disease. Angela moistened and warmed the mouthpiece, but did not blow a single preliminary note. Her eyes glazed over, and her long, bony fingers twittered idly over the noiseless keys. I waited anxiously, and I remembered what Marvin Breed had told me, that Angela's one escape from her bleak life with her father was to her room, where she would lock the door and play along with phonograph records. Newt now put a long playing record on the large phonograph in the room off the terrace. He came back with the record's slipcase, which he handed to me. The record was called Cat House Piano. It was of unaccompanied piano by Maud Lewis. Since Angela, in order to deepen her trance, let Lewis play his first number without joining him, I read some of what the jacket said about Lewis. Born in Louisville, Kentucky in 1905, I read, Mr. Lewis didn't turn to music until he had passed his 16th birthday, and then the instrument provided by his father was the violin. A year later, young Lewis chanced to hear Jimmy Yancey play the piano. This, as Lewis recalls, was the real thing. Soon, I read, Lewis was teaching himself to play the boogie-woogie piano, absorbing all that was possible from the older Yancey, who remained until his death a close friend and idol to Mr. Lewis. Since his father was a Pullman porter, I read, the Lewis family lived near the railroad. The rhythm of the train soon became a natural pattern to young Lewis, and he composed the boogie-woogie solo, now a classic of its kind, which became known as honky-tonk train blues. I looked up from my reading. The first number on the record was done. The phonograph needle was now scratching its slow way across the void to the second. The second number, I learned from the jacket, was Dragon Blues. Maud Lewis played 4 bars alone, and then Angela Honecker joined in. Her eyes were closed. I was flabbergasted. She was great. She improvised around the music of the Pullman porter's son, went from liquid lyricism to rasping lechery, to the shrill skittishness of a frightened child, to a heroine nightmare. Her glissandi spoke of heaven and hell and all that lay between. Such music from such a woman could only be a case of schizophrenia or demonic possession. My hair stood on end, as though Angela were rolling on the floor, foaming at the mouth, and babbling fluent Babylonian. When the music was done, I shrieked at Julian Castle, who was transfixed too. My God! Life! Who can understand even one little minute of it? Don't try, he said. Just pretend you understand. That's very good advice. I went limp. Castle quoted another poem from the books of Buchanan. Tiger got to hunt, bird got to fly, man got to sit and wonder why. Tiger got to sleep, bird got to land, man got to tell himself he understand. What's that from? I asked. What could it possibly be from but the books of Buchanan? I'd love to see a copy sometime. Copies are hard to come by, said Castle. They aren't printed. They're made by hand. And, of course, there is no such thing as a completed copy, since Buchanan is adding little things every day. Little Newt snorted. Religion. Beg your pardon? Castle said. See the cat? Asked Newt. See the cradle? End of chapter 81. That was the last time country was good before morphing into rock. Yeah, maybe. Chapter 82. Zama Kibo. Excuse me for 1 second. I have 2 drinks here. I have to balance them out. I have to balance my chakras. Zama Kibo. Major General Franklin Honecker didn't appear for supper. He telephoned and insisted on talking to me and no one else. He told me that he was keeping a vigil by Papa's bed, that Papa was dying in great pain. Frank sounded scared and lonely. Look, I said, why don't I go back to my hotel and you and I can get together later when this crisis is over? No, you stay right there. I want you to be where I can get a hold of you right away. He was panicky about my slipping out of his grasp. Since I couldn't account for his interest in me, I began to feel panicked too. Could you give me some idea what you want to see me about? I asked. Not over the telephone. Something about your father? Something about you? Something I've done? Something you're going to do, he said. I heard a chicken clucking in the background of Frank's end of the line. I heard a door open, and xylophone music came from some chamber. And the music was again, When Day is Done. And then the door was closed, and I couldn't hear the music anymore. I'd appreciate it if you'd give me some small hint of what you expect me to do, so I can sort of get set, I said. Zama Kibo. What? It's a Buchananist word. I don't know any Buchananist words. Julian Castle's there? Yes. Ask him, said Frank. I've got to go now. He hung up. So I asked Julian what Zama Kibo meant. You want a simple answer or a whole answer? Let's start with a simple one. Fate. Inevitable destiny. End of chapter 82. Chapter 83. Dr. Schlichter von Konzingwald approaches the break-even point. Cancer, said Julian Castle at dinner when I told him that Papa was dying in pain. Cancer of what? Cancer of about everything. You say he collapsed on the reviewing stand today? He sure did, said Angela. That was the effect of drugs, Castle declared. He's at the point now where drugs and pain just about balance out. More drugs would kill him. I'd kill myself, I think, murmured Newt. He was sitting on a sort of folding high chair he took with him when he went visiting. It was made of aluminum tubing and canvas. Beats sitting on a dictionary, an atlas, and a telephone book, he'd said when he'd erected it. That's what Corporal McCabe did, of course, said Castle. He named his major domo as his successor, and then he shot himself. Cancer too? I asked. I can't be sure. I don't think so, though. Unrelieved villainy just about wore him out, is my guess. That was all before my time. This is certainly a cheerful conversation, said Angela. I think everybody would agree that these are cheerful times, said Castle. Well, I said to him, I think you'd have more reasons for being cheerful than most doing what you're doing with life. I once had a yacht too, you know. I don't follow you. Having a yacht is a reason for being more cheerful than most people too. If you aren't Papa's doctor, I said, who is? One of my staff, a Dr. Schlichter von Konzingwald. A German? Vaguely. He was in the SS for 14 years. He was a camp physician at Auschwitz for 6 of those years. Doing penance at the House of Hope and Mercy, is he? Yes, said Castle, and making great strides, too, saving lives left and right. Good for him. If he keeps going at this present rate, working night and day, the number of people he saves will equal the number of people he let die in the year 3010. So there's another member of my cuirass, Dr. Schlichter von Kunzingwald. End of chapter 83. I feel like a yacht would add to my worries. We hear all those bad things about boats nowadays. Buying a boat. But, you know, a yacht is like a... yeah. Yeah. Chapter 84. Blackout. 3 hours after supper, Frank still hadn't come home. Julian Castle excused himself and went back to the House of Hope and Mercy in the jungle. Angela and Newt and I sat on the cantilevered terrace. The lights of Bolivar were lovely below us. There was a great illuminated cross at the top of the administration building of Manzano Airport. It was motor-driven, turning slowly, boxing the compass with electric piety. There were other bright places on the island, too, to the north of us. Mountains prevented our seeing them directly, but we could see in the sky their balloons of light. I asked Stanley, Frank Linhonecker's major domo, to identify for me the sources of the auroras. He pointed them out, counterclockwise. House of Hope and Mercy in the jungle, Papa's Palace, and Fort Jesus. Fort Jesus? It's the training camp for our soldiers. It's named after Jesus Christ? Sure, Stanley said. Why not? There was a new balloon of light growing quickly to the north. Before I could ask what it was, it revealed itself as headlights topping a ridge. The headlights were coming toward us. They belonged to a convoy. The convoy was composed of 5 American-made army trucks. Machine gunners manned ring mounts on the tops of the cabs. The convoy stopped in Franklin's driveway. Soldiers dismounted at once. They set to work on the grounds, digging foxholes and machine gun pits. I went out with Frank's major domo to ask the officer in charge what was going on. "We've been ordered to protect the next president of San Lorenzo," said the officer in island dialect. "He isn't here now," I informed him. "I don't know anything about it," he said. "My orders are to dig in here. That's all I know." I told Angela and Newt about it. "Do you think there's any real danger?" Angela asked me. "I'm a stranger here myself," I said. At that moment, there was a power failure. Every electric light in San Lorenzo went out. End of chapter 84. Now in about 9 minutes, I'm going to take my break. Alright, 8 minutes now. What do you think, Drapsnat? I think it'll be in about 8 minutes. Chapter 85. A Pack of Foma. Frank's servants brought us gasoline lanterns, told us that power failures were common in San Lorenzo and that there was no cause for alarm. I found that disquiet was hard for me to set aside, however, since Frank had spoken of my Zama Kibo. He made me feel as though my own free will were as irrelevant as the free will of a piggywig arriving at the Chicago stockyards. I remembered again the Stone Angel in Ilium, and I listened to the soldiers outside to their clinking, chunking, murmuring labors. I was unable to concentrate on the conversation of Angela and Newt, though they got into a fairly interesting subject. They told me their father had had an identical twin. They'd never met him. His name was Rudolph. Last they'd heard of him, he was a music box manufacturer in Zurich, Switzerland. "Father hardly ever mentioned him," said Angela. "Father hardly ever mentioned anybody," Newt declared. There was a sister of the old man, too, they told me. Her name was Celia. She raised giant schnauzers on Shelter Island in New York. She always sends a Christmas card, said Angela. With a picture of a giant schnauzer on it, said little Newt. Sure is funny how different people in different families turn out, Angela observed. That's very true, and well said, I agreed. I excused myself from the glittering company, and I asked Stanley, the major domo, if there happened to be a copy of the books of Becotered about the house. Stanley pretended not to know what I was talking about, and then he grumbled that the books of Buchanan were filth, and then he insisted that anyone who read them should die on the hook. And then he brought me a copy from Frank's bedside table. Oh, my nose is bugging me. I'm getting stuffy for the winter. Might have a cold. It was a heavy thing, about the size of an unabridged dictionary. It was written by hand. I trundled it off to my bedroom, to my slab of rubber on living rock. There was no index, so my search for the implications of Zama Kibo was difficult. Was in fact fruitless that night. I learned some things, but they were scarcely helpful. I learned of the Buchananist cosmogony, for instance, wherein Borasisi, the sun, held Pabu, the moon, in his arms, and hoped that Pabu would bear him a fiery child. But poor Pabu gave birth to children that were cold, that did not burn, and Barassi threw them away in disgust. These were the planets, who circled their terrible father at a safe distance. Then poor Pabu herself was cast away, and she went to live with her favorite child, which was Earth. Earth was Pabu's favorite because it had people on it, and the people looked up to her, and loved her, and sympathized. And what opinion did Buchanan hold of his own cosmogony? Foma! Lies, he wrote. A pack of Foma. End of chapter 85. Chapter 86. Two Little Jugs. It's hard to believe I slept at all, but I must have, for otherwise how could I have found myself awakened by a series of bangs and a flood of light? I rolled out of bed at the first bang and ran to the heart of the house in the brainless ecstasy of a volunteer fireman. I found myself rushing headlong at Newt and Angela, who were fleeing from beds of their own. We all stopped short, sheepishly analyzing the nightmarish sounds around us, sorting them out as coming from a radio, from an electric dishwasher, from a pump, all restored to noisy life by return of electric power. The three of us awakened enough to realize that there was humor in our situation, that we reacted in amusingly human ways to a situation that seemed mortal but wasn't. And to demonstrate my mastery over my illusory fate, I turned the radio off. We all chuckled. We all vied in saving face to be the greatest student of human nature, the person with the quickest sense of humor. Newt was the quickest. He pointed out to me that I had my passport in my billfold and my wristwatch in my hands. I had no idea what I'd grabbed in the face of death. I didn't know that I'd grabbed anything. I countered, hilariously, by asking Angela and Newt why they had both carried little thermos jugs, identical red and gray jug, capable of holding about 3 cups of coffee. It was news to them that they both were carrying such jugs. They were shocked to find them in their hands. They were spared making an explanation by more banging outside. I was bound to find out what the banging was right away, and with a brazenness as unjustified as my earlier panic, I investigated. Found Frank Honecker outside, tinkering with a motor generator set mounted on a truck. The generator was the new source of our electricity. The gasoline motor that drove it was backfiring and smoking, and Frank was trying to fix it. He had the heavenly Mona with him. She was watching him, as always, gravely. "Boy, have I got news for you," he yelled at me, and he led the way back into the house. Angela and Newt were still in the living room, but somehow, somewhere, they had managed to get rid of their particular thermos jugs. The contents of those jugs, of course, were parts of the legacies from Dr. Felix Honecker, were parts of the Womp Eater of my cuirass, were chips of Ice 9. Frank took me aside. "How awake are you?" "As awake as I ever was." "Well, I hope you're really wide awake, because we've got to start talking right now." "Start talking." "Let's get some privacy." Frank told Mona to make herself comfortable. "We'll call you if we need you." I looked at Mona, meltingly, and thought that I had never needed anyone as much as I needed her. End of chapter 86. Let's see. We got time for one more. Chapter 87, The Cut of My Jib. About this Franklin Honecker, the pinch-faced child spoke with the timbre and conviction of a kazoo. I had heard it said in the army that such and such man spoke like a man with a paper rectum. Such a man was General Honecker. Poor Frank had almost no experience in talking to anyone, having spent a furtive childhood as Secret Agent X9. Now, hoping to be hearty and persuasive, he said tinny things to me, things like, "I like the cut of your jib," and "I want to talk cold turkey to you, man to man." And he took me down to what he called his den in order that we might call a spade and let the chips fall where they may. So we went down steps cut into a cliff and into a natural cave that was beneath and behind the waterfall. There were a couple of drawing tables down there. 3 pale, bare-boned Scandinavian chairs, a bookcase containing books on architecture, books in German, French, Finnish, Italian, English. All was lit by electric lights, lights that pulsed with the panting of the motor generator set. And the most striking thing about the cave was that there were pictures painted on the walls, painted with kindergarten boldness, painted with the flat clay, earth, and charcoal colors of very early man. I did not have to ask Frank how old the cave paintings were. I was able to date them by their subject. The paintings were not of mammoths or saber-toothed tigers or ichthyophallic cave bears. The paintings treated endlessly the aspects of Mona Amons Manzano as a little girl. This is where Mona's father worked? I asked. That's right. He was the finner who designed the House of Hope and Mercy in the Jungle. I know. That isn't what I brought you down here to talk about. This is something about your father? This is about you. Frank put his hand on my shoulder and he looked me in the eye. The effect was dismaying. Frank meant to inspire camaraderie, but his head looked to me like a bizarre little owl, blinded by light and perched on a tall white post. Maybe you'd better come to the point. There's no sense in beating around the bush, he said. I'm a pretty good judge of character, and if I do say so myself, I like the cut of your jib. Thank you. I think you and I could really hit it off. I have no doubt of it. We've both got things that mesh. I was grateful when he took his hand from my shoulder. He meshed the fingers of his hands like gear teeth. One hand represented him, I suppose, and the other represented me. We need each other. He wiggled his fingers to show me how gears worked. I was silent for some time, though outwardly friendly. Do you get my meaning? Said Frank at last. You and I, we're going to do something together? That's right. Frank clapped his hands. You're a worldly person, used to meeting the public, and I'm a technical person, used to working behind the scenes, making things go. How can you possibly know what kind of person I am? We just met. Your clothes, the way you talk. He put his hand on my shoulder again. I like the cut of your jib. So you said. Frank was frantic for me to complete his thought, to do it enthusiastically, but I was still at sea. Am I to understand that you're offering me some kind of job here in San Lorenzo? He clapped his hands. He was delighted. That's right. What would you say to $100,000 a year? Good God, I cried. What would I have to do for that? Practically nothing, and you'd drink out of gold goblets every night and eat off gold plates, and you'd have a palace all your own. What's the job? I said. President of the Republic of San Lorenzo. End of chapter 87. And it is now after 10:50. I'm going to go ahead and take a quick break. I'm back. Turn the thing back on. There we go. Alright. Okay, just fucking spilled water all over myself. Again. Luckily it was just water. Doesn't appear to have gotten any books or electronics. I hate this water bottle. I need a new one so bad. I guess I'm gonna take another break while I change my clothes and get like 3 towels. Well, that sucked, but it could have been a lot worse. Didn't get on any fucking books this time like I did last time. I said I was going to change my clothes, but really, like, I guess by that I meant take them off. Which is a change. Okay. I need a new water bottle so bad. It's like the 3rd time. Okay, what was I talking about? Stripping? Shut up. I'm like Germa, like, I'm just naked all the time and you guys don't even know. Until somebody asks me to turn on my cam and I feel like, shit, shit, shit. That's what that guy's like, right? Oh yeah, what was I talking about? Oh, I was gonna decide how much longer we're gonna go. Because, like, I don't think I have it in me to fill the whole 2 hours. Let's shoot to go another half hour. Chapter 88. Why Frank Couldn't Be President. Me? President? I gasped. Who else is there? You're nuts. Don't say no until you've really thought about it. Frank watched me anxiously. No! You haven't really thought about it. Enough to know it's crazy. Frank made his fingers into gears again. We'd work together. I'd be backing you up all the time. Good, so if I got plugged from the front, you'd get it too. Plugged? Shot! Assassinated! Frank was mystified. Why would anybody shoot you? So he could get to be president? Frank shook his head. Nobody in San Lorenzo wants to be president, he promised me. It's against their religion. It's against your religion, too? I thought you were going to be the next president. He said, and he found it hard to go on. He looked haunted. You what? I asked. He faced the sheet of water that curtained the cave. Maturity, the way I understand it, he told me, is knowing what your limitations are. He wasn't far from Buchanan in defining maturity. Maturity, Buchanan tells us, is a bitter disappointment for which no remedy exists, unless laughter can be really said to remedy anything. I know I've got limitations, Frank continued. They're the same limitations my father had. Is that right? Got a lot of very good ideas, just the way my father did, Frank told me, and the waterfall. But he was no good at facing the public, and neither am I. End of chapter 88. Anyone see Mr. Rat lately? Nobody's listening. Chapter 89. Duffel. You'll take the job? Frank inquired anxiously. No, I told him. Do you know anybody who might want to take the job? Frank was giving a classic illustration of what Buchanan calls duffel. Duffel in the Buchananist sense is the destiny of thousands upon thousands of persons when placed in the hands of a stupa. A stupa is a fog-bound child. I laughed. Something's funny? Pay no attention when I laugh, I begged him. I'm a notorious pervert in that respect. Are you laughing at me? I shook my head. No. Word of honor? Word of honor. People used to make fun of me all the time. You might have imagined that. They used to yell things at me. I didn't imagine that. People are unkind sometimes without meaning to be, I suggested. I wouldn't have given my word of honor on that. You know what they used to yell at me? No. They used to yell at me, "Hey, X9, where are you going?" It doesn't seem so bad. That's what they used to call me, said Frank in sulky reminiscence. Secret Agent X9. I didn't tell him that I knew already. Where are you going, X9? Frank echoed again. I imagined what the taunters had been like, imagined where fate had eventually goosed and chivied them to. The wits who had yelled at Frank were surely nicely settled in death-like jobs at General Forge and Foundry, at Alien Power and Light, at the telephone company. And here, by God, was Secret Agent X9, a major general, offering to make me king, in a cave that was curtained by a tropical waterfall. They really would have been surprised if I'd stopped and told them where I was going. You mean, you had some premonition that you would end up here? It was a Buchananist question. I was going to Jack's hobby shop, he said with no sense of anticlimax. Oh. They all knew I was going there, but they didn't know what really went on there. They would have been really surprised, especially the girls, if they'd found out what really went on. The girls didn't think I knew anything about girls. What really went on? I was screwing Jack's wife every day. That's how come I fell asleep all the time in high school. That's how come I never achieved my full potential. He roused himself from the sordid recollection. Come on, be president of San Lorenzo. You'd be really good at it with your personality. Please? End of chapter 89. Chapter 90. Only one catch. And the time of night, and the cave and the waterfall, and the stone angel and Ilium, and 250,000 cigarettes and 3,000 quarts of booze, and 2 wives and no wife, and no love waiting for me anywhere, and the listless life of an ink-stained hack, and Pabu the moon, and Barassi the sun, and their children. All things conspired to form one cosmic vindit. One mighty shove into Buchananism, into the belief that God was running my life and that he had work for me to do. And inwardly, I saruned which is to say that I acquiesced to the seeming demands of my Vindit. Inwardly, I agreed to become the next president of San Lorenzo. Outwardly, I was still guarded, suspicious. There must be a catch, I hedged. There isn't. There will be an election? Never has been. We'll just announce who the new president is. And nobody will object? Nobody objects to anything. They aren't interested. They don't care. There has to be a catch. There's kind of one, Frank admitted. I knew it. I began to shrink from my Vindit. What is it? What's the catch? Well, it isn't really a catch because you don't have to do it if you don't want to, but it would be a good idea, though. Let's hear this great idea. Well, if you're going to be president, I think you really ought to marry Mona. But you don't have to if you don't want to. You're the boss. She would have me? If she'd have me, she'd have you. All you have to do is ask her. Why should she say yes? It's predicted in the books of Buchanan that she'll marry the next president of San Lorenzo, said Frank. Chapter 91. Mona. Frank brought Mona to her father's cave and left me alone. We had difficulty speaking at first. I was shy. Her gown was diaphanous. Her gown was azure. It was a simple gown, caught lightly at the waist by a gossamer thread. All else was shaped by Mona herself. Her breasts were like pomegranates, or what you will, but nothing so much as a young woman's breasts. Her feet were all but bare. Her toenails were exquisitely manicured. Her scanty sandals were gold. How do you do? I asked. My heart was pounding. Blood boiled in my ears. It's not possible to make a mistake, she assured me. I did not know that this was a customary greeting given by all Buchananists when meeting a shy person, so I responded with a feverish discussion of whether it was possible to make a mistake or not. My God, you have no idea how many mistakes I've already made. You're looking at the world's champion mistake maker, I blurted, and so on. Do you have any idea what Frank just said to me? About me? About everything, but especially about you. He told you that you could have me if you wanted. Yes. That's true. I Yes? I don't know what to say next. Bokomaru would help, she suggested. What? Take off your shoes, she commanded, and she removed her sandals with the utmost grace. I am a man of the world, having had, by a reckoning I once made, more than 53 women. I can say that I have seen women undress themselves in every way that it can be done. I have watched the curtains part on every variation of the final act. And yet, the one woman who made me groan involuntarily did no more than remove her sandals. I tried to untie my shoes. No bridegroom ever did worse. I got one shoe off, but knotted the other one tight. I tore a thumbnail in the knot, finally ripped off the shoe without untying it. Then off came my socks. Mona was already sitting on the floor, her legs extended, her round arms thrust behind her for support, her head tilted back, her eyes closed. It was up to me now to complete my first, great God, Boko Maru. Chapter 92. On the poet's celebration of his first Bokomaru. These are not Buchanan's words. They are mine. Sweet wraith, invisible mist of, I am, my soul. Wraith, lovesick, o'erlong alone. Wouldst another sweet soul meet? Long have I advised thee ill as to where two souls might tryst. My souls, my souls, my soul, my soul. Go there, sweet soul, be kissed. Chapter 93. How I almost lost my Mona. Do you find it easier to talk to me now? Mona inquired. As though I'd known you for 1,000 years, I confessed. I felt like crying. I love you, Mona. I love you. She said it simply. What a fool Frank was. Oh? To give you up. He did not love me. He was going to marry me because Papa wanted him to. He loves another. Who? A woman he knew in Ilium. The lucky woman had to be the wife of the owner of Jack's hobby shop. He told you? Tonight, when he freed me to marry you. Mona. Yes? Is there anyone else in your life? She was puzzled. Many, she said at last. That you love. I love everyone. As much as me? Yes. She seemed to have no idea that this might bother me. I got off the floor, sat in a chair, and started putting my shoes and socks back on. I suppose you perform. You do what we just did with other people? Boko Maru? Boko Maru. Of course. I don't want you to do it with anybody but me from now on, I declared. Instantly, tears filled her eyes. She adored her promiscuity. She was angered that I should try to make her feel shame. I make people happy. Love is good, not bad. As your husband, I want all your love for myself. She stared at me with widening eyes. A Sinwat! What was that? A Sinwat, she cried. A man who wants all of somebody's love. That's very bad. In case of marriage, I think it's a very good thing. It's the only thing. She was still on the floor, and I, now with my shoes and socks back on, was standing. I felt very tall, though I'm not very tall, and I felt very strong, though I'm not very strong. And I was a respectful stranger to my own voice. My voice had a metallic authority that was new. As I went on talking in ball-peen tones, it dawned on me what was happening. What was happening already. I was already starting to rule. I told Mona that I had seen her performing a sort of vertical Boko Maru with a pilot on the reviewing stand shortly after my arrival. You're to have nothing more to do with him, I told her. What's his name? I don't know, she whispered. She was looking down now. And what about young Philip Castle? You mean Boko Maru? I mean anything and everything. As I understand it, you two grew up together. Yes. Buchanan tutored your both? Yes. The recollection made her radiant again. I suppose there was plenty of Boko Maruing in those days. Yes, she said happily. You aren't to see him any more either, is that clear? No. No. I will not marry us in what... She stood. Goodbye. Goodbye? I was crushed. Buchanan tells us it is very wrong to not love everyone exactly the same. What does your religion say? I don't have one. I do. I had stopped ruling. I see you do, I said. Goodbye, man with no religion. She went to the stone staircase. Mona. She stopped. Yes? Could I have your religion if I wanted it? Of course. I want it. Good. I love you. And I love you. I sighed. That's the end of chapter 93. 10 minutes left. How many chapters left? Like 33 chapters left. That's like a good hour of material. I think this is a good place to stop. The Cat's Cradle has been about an hour a pop. We got looks like maybe about an hour left. So yeah, I think that's a good place to stop. Thanks everybody for coming out. We're close to finishing this book. That's exciting, isn't it? We're also close to finishing the other book, but not as close. You know, we've had a couple stumbles along the way. Obviously, it's going to take longer for the, cooperation book. But I got some plans on what we'll read next, and we might take a break and like finish both of these before we start something new. I don't think this 2 books thing is going to be permanent. It just was a convenient way to deal with the crazy schedule that ended up dawning on us in the middle of Mort. So, yeah, thank you guys so much. I am cold and naked, and water is everywhere. So think I'm going to say that that's about it for today. I'm gonna go to bed. Good night, everyone.